get lost. Try to know which way you're going. Places get so vast. You can get lost so fast. But don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. Try to keep your fears from growing. Summon help or calmly let someone help, or better yet, just don't ever get lost. Never get lost, never get lost. Try to know which way you're going. Places get so vast. You can get lost so fast. But don't be afraid. Don't be dismayed. Try to keep your fears from growing. Summon help or calmly let someone help, or better yet, just don't ever get lost. Never get lost, never get lost.
And what a perfect way to say good morning and welcome to another Sunday here at First Unitarian Society, where independent thinkers gather in a safe, nurturing environment to explore issues of social, spiritual, and ethical significance as we try to make a difference in this world. I'm Steve Goldberg, a proud and intellectually gifted member of this congregation, and I'd like to extend a very special welcome to any guests, visitors, and newcomers. If this is your first time at First Unitarian Society, I think you'll find that it's a very special place. In a moment, you'll hear the sound of the gong, and that'll be your signal to join in a moment of centering silence so we can be fully present with each other this morning. And after that, I invite you to sit back or lean forward to enjoy today's service. I know it will touch your heart, stir your spirit, and trigger one or two new thoughts. We're glad you're here.
Please remain standing for the opening words and the chalice lighting. We come together today in this room, some as friends, others as strangers, but all of us sojourners seeking human acceptance and human warmth. Here may we discover others like us, and may the flame of love be rekindled in our midst. We come together today as teachers with visions to share, desiring to be heard and understood. Let us recognize that all men and women have something important to share, something worthwhile, a singular story to tell. May we listen to each other with respect and with compassion. We come together as seekers, our spirits impoverished from meeting the week's many demands, thirsting after the living waters of worship and fellowship. May all who have entered here be nourished in this house of free religion. Spirit of truth and goodness and community, we are thankful for the custom that brings us together, because we know that our lives would be so much poorer, our quest for understanding so much more daunting were it not for occasions such as these. And so let us make the most of this opportunity for connection, edification, and renewal. Steve, if you now light our chalice. And as he does so, please join me in reading the words printed in today's program. Come into this circle of friendship. Come with your questions, come with your cares. Come with your sorrows, joys, fears, and yearnings. Come into this hallowed space, open and expectant, seeking not to evade, but to engage life, to meet its challenges with curiosity and with courage. And in the spirit of fellowship on this fine June morning, please turn to your neighbor and exchange with him or her a warm greeting. At this time, I'd like to invite any children who are in our midst to come forward for the message for all ages. Hey. So about 9 years ago, I finished writing a book. And this is the book. It's called Making the Good Life Last. I'm not trying to promote it here this morning. But in this book, I identify 4 keys to living well in this world. And one of those keys to living well is to exercise patience. You know, and the Dalai Lama, who's a very important spiritual teacher, says that patience, of all the virtues we have, is the most like a muscle because it gets stronger when you exercise it, okay? So this is a story about patience, and it's called Remy the Rhino Learns Patience. He had taken deep breaths, and he had counted to 10, but Remy the Rhino was charging again. The zebras this time were about to get hurt because they'd eaten the grass that he had saved for dessert. It seemed there was constantly someone to charge, because that's what you do when you're angry and large. His doctor said he had issues with rage, but his daddy told him, just please act your age. Everything always made Remy upset. The dust was too dry. The rain was too wet. He hated the heat and he hated the cold. He wouldn't put up with the young or the old. The meerkats were jumpy, the hornbills too loud, giraffes made him grumpy, the lions were too proud, gazelles were too timid, baboons made him scowl. They'd better stop bothering Remy right now. one evening, he dropped for a snooze on the ground when an aardvark came bumbling and snuffling around. Hungry for insects, she searched with her nose till she tripped on a patch of rhinoceros toes. And Remy got mad, as you probably guessed. But the aardvark did something I wouldn't suggest. She stood there waiting for Remy to charge her. She stood there and watched as he got closer and larger. And at the very last moment, as quick as can be, she dodged, and Remy ran into the tree. He tried to step back, but his horn had got caught. And the more Remy struggled, the stucker it got. He groaned, and he steamed, and he moaned, and he grunted, but still that old tree wouldn't do what he wanted. He screamed like a banshee, and he stomped on the ground. It sounded like thunder for miles around. Hundreds of animals fled in confusion. And the aardvark said softly, "I have a solution." Remy calmed down for a moment or two, so Aardvark went on. "I know just what to do. What you need are some creatures to chew on this tree. I've got some connections. Leave it to me." The aardvark left Remy alone to consider what kind of beasts nibbled trees for their dinner. When the aardvark came back with a termite parade. "My termites are perfect for work of this kind, but there's one little thing that you must keep in mind. Whenever you struggle or jerk or get angry, it scares off the termites and it slows down their work." And so Remy experienced strange new sensations. He took a crash course in the virtue of patience. He waded through rain, and he waded through thunder. He waded through birds climbing over and under. He waded through leopards' absurd decorations. He waded through gawkers from faraway nations. He waded through elephant balancing acts until little by little, he learned to relax. There it is. Do you remember how at the beginning of the story he got mad at the zebras and was chasing them off because they were eating his grass? What are they doing now? They're all sharing. And that's what happens when you learn how to be patient. So thank you for listening to the story, and now we're going to invite you to go to Summer Fun and have a lot of fun while we have our own fun here singing our next hymn. Please be seated. And I invite you now into a few moments of meditation and inner communion. So let us settle in and let us be serene at this time of spiritual deepening. Put aside for a few moments all thoughts that annoy. Leave behind all fretful concerns, all troubles that torment, all inner confusion. Put away for now all the plans to be made, the things that need to be done, the plaudits to be won. Breathe deeply. Clear the mind of all its clutter. Purge the spirit of all inhospitality. After a busy morning, sit easy and be at rest and feel your body recover its balance, your mind its bearings, your spirit its strength. Feel the presence of your companions surrounding you. Find reassurance in the warmth of their welcome and the support of their caring. We who have been wanderers, groping for something we know not what, here is a place for us, a temporary but welcome home for every restless and weary spirit. Let us continue on in a moment, two more of silent reflection. Blessed be, and amen. So I'd like to offer two commentaries on parish ministry that rang true for me when I initially ran across them. The first is from Martin Copenhagen, and Martin Copenhagen is a UCC minister, United Church of Christ, or Unitarians Considering Christ, as they're sometimes known. And this is from a book that he co-authored, and that became one of my favorite books in the last few years, called This Odd and Wondrous Calling. Copenhagen writes, "Wisdom may be the one distinguishing quality of pastors, because all people have an equal opportunity to demonstrate the same integrity and faithfulness that good ministers exhibit, but ministers have been given a unique opportunity to become wise. Of course, not all pastors are wise, God knows, and often the wisest people are not pastors. But the nature of the pastoral life is such that it gives a person an extraordinary shot at becoming wise. But then I need to pause to say a word about what I mean by wisdom. It has been called the woolly mammoth of ideas, big, shaggy, and elusive. Philosophers, theologians, and social scientists have all found wisdom notoriously difficult to define. And in part, this is because wisdom is more than a single attribute. It's more like a cluster of attributes, including a clear-eyed view of human behavior coupled with keen understanding, a certain tolerance for ambiguity and what might be called the messiness of life, emotional resiliency, an ability to think clearly in circumstances of conflict or stress, a tendency to approach a crisis as an intriguing puzzle to be solved, a gift for seeing how smaller facts fit into the larger picture, a mixture of empathy and detachment, a way of suspending judgment long enough to achieve greater clarity, and an ability to act coupled with a willingness to embrace judicious inaction. Again, it is not all pastors who are wise in this sense. Nevertheless, the kind of experiences one has as a pastor are just the kind of experiences that can help to nurture whatever gifts for wisdom one might happen to have. The second reading is a bit of a meditation from a UU minister named Elizabeth Nguyen, and she is a Vietnamese American and a strategist with our headquarters in Boston, the UUA, and she also happens to be a graduate of the University of Wisconsin. Elizabeth writes, "This is for when you want to write the resignation letter. When you want to skip town, give up on this job, this congregation, this community, this family, this faith. When you want to start a new life slinging brunch, on a beach, definitely on a beach, specializing in sunny-side-up eggs on buttered toast and mango smoothies. Never think about justice and covenant and love and heartbreak, just about all the yellows of the sun and the egg and the mango. Spirit, give us the long view. Because we are only here because someone else refused to give up on this congregation, this community, this family, and this faith. Give us perspective, humor, a break. Give us teammates who we can tell the truth to. Give us faith and honesty and mangoes. May we dig down past the giving up and find the grit to get through."
It was a February day when your dad came by before going away. A U-Haul truck in the driveway. The day it was suddenly real. I told you not to come outside, but you saw the truck and you smiled so wide. A real-life truck in your driveway. We let you sit behind the wheel. Goodbye, goodbye. Now it's just me and my little guy. And the house felt so big, and I felt so small. The house felt so big, and I felt so small. That night I tucked you into bed. I will never forget how you sat up and said, "Is there another truck coming to to our driveway, a truck that will take Mommy away. And the house felt so big, and I felt so small. The house felt so big, and I knew there would be moments that I'd miss, and I knew there would be space I couldn't fill, and I knew I'd come up short a million different ways, and I did, and I do, and I will. But like that February day, I will take your hand, squeeze it tightly, and say, there's not another truck in the driveway. Your mom isn't going anywhere. Your mom is staying right here. Your mom isn't going anywhere. Your mom is staying right here, no matter what. I'll be here when it all feels so big, till it all feels so small. When it all feels so big, till it all feels so small. Till it all feels so small.
Thank you so much, Tamara. Thank you, Linda. In his last report to the parish in May of 1987, my predecessor, Max Gabler, provided a summation of services he had rendered to the First Unitarian Society during his distinguished 35-year pastorate. His records indicated that Max had presided at 1,112 weddings, 236 memorial services, child dedications totaled 356, and 1,789 people had been welcomed into membership. Max did not divulge in that report how many sermons he had written and delivered, but I would guess it was somewhere in the vicinity of 900. Now, from my own clergy logbook and a few back-of-the-envelope calculations, I figure that around 2,800 people have joined the society during my tenure, and listeners were subjected to 750 of my sermons. I presided at fewer weddings than Max Gabler, only 540. He married half of Madison sometimes, I think. But I've also presided at far more memorial services, 347. Between us, Kelly Crocker and I have probably dedicated in the neighborhood of 450 infants and children. So these are, perhaps you will agree, some rather impressive numbers, but they do not tell the whole story, and if they did, this would be the shortest sermon on record. In the May FUS newsletter, I listed other developments that were related to the Society's financial progress, construction and restoration projects, increases in staffing and in programming, extended outreach efforts into the larger community, governance reform. I don't intend to repeat today what has already been published. If you are interested, you can check out this newsletter on our website. So what I prefer to share with you today is a bit more squishy, a bit more subjective, something that is less a historical overview and more of a personal testament, a summary of some of the insights that I have gained over my 3 decades among you. And whether they will strike you as significant insights remains to be seen, but at the very least, you will have a brief glimpse at one Unitarian Universalist minister's inner life. So at the risk of indulging in a cliche at the outset, let me begin by acknowledging that my missteps have generally proven more instructive than any successes that I have enjoyed. And fortunately, there have not been too many pratfalls in 30 years, because if there had, my career path probably would have unfolded a bit differently. You know, most men and women who enter the ministry do not stick with it. The dropout rate after 10 years of service is 50%. And so it is the rare individual who enters this profession as young and as green as I was and keeps plugging away until Social Security kicks in. Because for many people, it's very easy to get discouraged doing this kind of work. So while pondering what I wanted to share with you this morning, I returned to a file that I had been keeping from the time that I left Binghamton, New York, to come here to Madison. And in that file was the last sermon I delivered to my former congregation, and the sermon was entitled Parting Shots, which gives you an indication of the ambivalence that I felt after 7 years in that community. So in that discourse, I also shared some of my learnings during the 7 years that I had been in Binghamton. I said back then that I had gained some really important self-knowledge, and particularly about my rough edges. A career in the parish ministry was, for me, something of a stretch, I confessed. A role that, from a temperamental standpoint, I was really not all that well suited for. From time to time, I had been informed by members of my congregation in Binghamton, well, usually secondhand, that I could be intimidating, standoffish, overly cerebral, lacking warmth, in other words. Since coming to Madison, I have undoubtedly mellowed just a bit, but as they say, the leopard really doesn't change his spots. Similar comments have reached my ears here as well. And I will allow that there is some measure of truth to them. And while these may be ineradicable flaws, I have gradually figured out how to compensate for most of them most of the time. And having colleagues like Kelly Crocker and Karen Gustafson and Marianne Macklin, that has helped me a great deal, and I have appreciated them for the balance that they have brought to our clergy team. One of the secrets, I think, of long-term ministry is the ability to recognize your own limitations and bring on board co-workers who exhibit strength in those very departments. Of course, that also means that you are obliged to share the limelight, to give your colleagues encouragement, opportunities to shine, and then when they do so, to offer them commendation, all of which I have tried to do. And it also helps if you do not take yourself too seriously and can make peace with your own deficiencies. The admonition of an enlightened Zen master that he once shared with his own students is one that I have also taken to heart. He told them, "You are perfect just as you are, and you could also stand some improvement." A second insight I have gained, and one that Don Miguel Ruiz highlights in his little book, The Four Agreements, is not to take most things personally. Because often as not, when someone takes you to task, someone declares that you have let them down, something in their own life experience or in their unspoken assumptions about you is probably contributing to their displeasure. And that's not to say that I, as an object of their displeasure, am always blameless. There may well be something in the complaint that deserves sober reflection. And if so, I have found that nothing does more to mollify my critics than to simply admit I missed the mark. And in fact, if that has truly been the case, to offer a mea culpa. And I've also learned over time that a person can do this without losing their intrinsic sense of worthiness. As Catherine Schultz points out in her book, Being Wrong, which I recommend to you, In our culture, most of us are terrified of public speaking, but also of making mistakes. We take the mistakes that we make too personally, presuming that if we admit to being fallible, we will forfeit our credibility, our trustworthiness, and the respect of others. But in fact, my experience has been just the opposite, that in dropping our defenses, in owning up to our mistakes, we can actually gain respect. And we can also develop greater sympathy for the world's other fallible people. And if we honestly do think that we are being seriously misjudged, well, rather than go into a defensive crouch, we would do much better by pausing, listening quietly, seeking clarity through questioning. Be curious, in other words, rather than argumentative. Have I always succeeded in dispelling negativity in this way? Well, of course not. Because when someone comes onto me strong and without warning or provocation, I feel that surge of adrenaline and the old reptilian brain gets a jump on my better judgment. We're all familiar with that. And in such instances, the outcomes are often, if not always, less than ideal. That leads to a third insight, one that I had already alluded to in my message to the children: the value of patience. Early in my career, this was hardly my strong suit. And by the time that I got around to writing that book, Making the Good Life Last, I had kind of turned a corner in this respect. And I did not remember when I was writing that book that at the time of my departure, many years earlier from Binghamton, New York, my colleague and mentor up the road in Ithaca had written a letter, a kind of a farewell letter, in which he offered me some pointers about succeeding here in Madison, enjoying a long and prosperous ministry here in Madison. And chief among the pointers he gave me was exercise patience. He says, you will encounter critics and adversaries, and your best weapon for dealing with the people you want to see gone is the knowledge that your ministry is more lasting than their dissatisfaction. I call this patience, Jack said. Others call it stubbornness. And so Jack described the president of his board who had gotten under his skin. But he did not let that conflict distract him from his core ministerial responsibilities. This too shall pass, he reminded himself. The key to staying centered when work becomes a struggle is the exercise of patience. And as I quickly learned, patience is also called for when one is stepping into a parish that has been served so well by your predecessor, the distinguished Max David Gabler. You have to be tolerant of those who, even after your decade of service, still want to refer to you as the new minister. Or those who will react to something that you have done, some decision that you have made, and they will tell you reprovingly, that is not the way Max would have done it. Patience tells us not to resent statements like that, not to personalize them, but rather to see them as a sign of honor for your much-esteemed predecessor. If you can stick it out, if you can perform well, the congregation will, in all likelihood, come to embrace you on your own merits, not just because you're a clone of Max Gabler. Fourth, know how to claim your authority without throwing your weight around. A few years ago, I was asked to deliver the sermon at the annual General Assembly's Service of the Living Tradition. That's a very big deal. That's an honor. You speak before 5,000 UUs from all over the country. And the topic that I decided to speak on was the topic of clergy authority, which has been in rather serious decline in recent decades. The office of parish minister, which in an earlier era was a source of considerable influence in the larger community, today it enjoys very little of its former prestige. Nevertheless, despite this, within any given faith community, a minister can, over time, win the confidence of the congregation and become someone whose opinion and judgment carry considerable weight. And boy, was that ever true of my predecessor, Max Gabler. And I like to think that it's been true for me. And probably it has been. Because one of the comments about my ministry that I have heard quite often is that if Michael wants something to happen, it is going to happen. Or words to that effect. And frankly, I don't think that there's anything terribly wrong with that. To be called into leadership entails and requires the granting of a certain amount of authority. The trick in a democratically governed system, such as ours, is to exercise that authority in a way that complements other people's efforts and respects the influence to which they also are entitled. For me, it has always been important to recognize that there are natural and appropriate limits to any person's authority, including mine, and thus to use it sparingly and at times when it can produce a positive institutional outcome. I like to think of it less in terms of authority, which is kind of a word that's kind of a turnoff for a lot of people, but rather as accumulated social capital that I can then invest in building and expansion projects, in social justice initiatives, in organizational realignment. For most purposes, however, I've tried hard in these 30 years not to step on the rightful prerogatives of our lay leadership, of the congregation as the governing body, or co-workers who have been empowered within their own spheres of influence. And that's what it means to exercise proper authority without becoming authoritarian. A fifth point. Use your authority, but don't overinvest in outcomes. For much of my ministerial career, I had this bad habit of overfunctioning. I always had the nagging feeling that I had not done enough, and there was always something else that needed to be done that it was my sole responsibility to do. I did not need a supervisor breathing down my neck or giving me marching orders. I was pretty much my own taskmaster. Parker Palmer calls this kind of behavior functional atheism. The belief, he says, that ultimate authority for everything rests with us. That if anything decent is going to happen here, we are the ones. I am the one who must make it happen. Functional atheism. Now, the pattern for this particular behavior was set a long time ago, way back when I was in undergraduate school. After a less than stellar academic performance in my freshman year, a year in which I spent a good deal of time on more pleasurable pursuits, I decided after that disappointing year that a more disciplined approach to study was in order. So what did I do? As a sophomore, I began taking course overloads, 5 or 6 courses instead of the mandatory 4. That way, I reasoned to myself there would not be any time left over for extraneous pursuits and pleasures, except visiting Trina in her campus 250 miles away. And that worked. My grades went up, and they stayed right up through my master's program and through my doctoral program. And so I became a certified workaholic, always afraid that if I did not keep my nose to the grindstone, I would not measure up, I would not make the grade. And it wasn't so much a fear of failing as of not succeeding at the highest possible level. And so as a parish minister, I developed this false feeling that it all rested on my shoulders. And over time, predictably, this became an unhealthy state of affairs. Trina will agree that I worked far too many hours at the expense of her and Kyle, at the expense of my own emotional and mental well-being. Tasks that I could well have delegated to others, to capable staff or volunteers, I insisted on carrying out myself to ensure that they would be done just right. And during all that time, there was a lot of feedback there, because FUS was doing very well. We were thriving, but it was not a sustainable proposition for any of us. The harder I worked, the more my people skills deteriorated. Then in 2005, I took a much-needed sabbatical. In good workaholic fashion, I used those 4 months away to crank out the first draft of that book. But that was not my most enduring achievement. For the entire time that we spent in Tucson, Arizona, Trina and I did not darken the door of a Unitarian Universalist church. We took a complete break from institutional engagement. And so as the weeks slipped by, it dawned on me that I needed to stop obsessing about outcomes. Just let my coworker do their jobs, practice ministry in the best way I knew how, and then just let the chips fall where they may. And that was like getting a new lease on life. And these last 12 post-sabbatical years have been, without a doubt, the most enjoyable and the most fulfilling of my career. I've weathered some choppy waters. I've had interpersonal and institutional challenges. These haven't gone away. But as I practiced detachment, it was easier to maintain a non-anxious presence even when things were not going particularly well. So I kind of came to the same place as Edward Everett Hale, who famously declared, "I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I will not let what I cannot do prevent me from doing what I can." Sixth and finally, and related to the previous point, in the end, it's really not about me. The position of lead minister carries with it the occupational hazard of conflating one's own interests with those of the institution one serves. Over time, you do become very closely identified with the church. When people thought about First Unitarian Society during the 1970s and the 1980s, the first thing that came to mind, even before Frank Lloyd Wright, was Max Gabler. And before that, the outspoken Kenneth Patton became the face of this congregation. And whether or not Reverends Patton and Gabler in some way sought celebrity status, I have no idea. I can't say. But I do know that there is something very, very seductive about the amount of attention one commands as the senior minister of First Unitarian Society. It can be a real ego trip, and it can also be very problematic. Ministers who stand on pedestals can also become lightning rods. As my colleague from Schenectady, Charles Slapp, once observed, people do not join UU churches because they agree with our doctrines, because we don't have any. And we have no creeds. We have no book of common prayer. We have no papal marching orders to follow. So what are we left with? Moi, the minister, who then becomes the symbol of all that is right or all that is wrong with the church. It can be very flattering, Slapp says, to be the minister. But it also means that all too often our congregations polarize around their leadership. Having been in this business for quite some time, I fervently believe that our society, the largest society, needs strong, dynamic, democratically organized, multi-generational, activist faith congregations like First Unitarian Society of Madison. We're very important in this world, small as we are. And I have done my best to ensure that the people of FUS have always had a sense of ownership for this establishment, always given the opportunity to perform its most important work. In other words, I have sought these past 30 years to be a good steward of this enterprise. Not long ago, one of our members expressed unhappiness with the decision that I had made, and she reminded me that she was a member before I arrived and she was going to be around after I left. Just so. She's right. I've never pretended to have a proprietary interest in the First Unitarian Society. It doesn't belong to me, and I have served always at the congregation's sufferance. I have, however, done the best I could to build upon a distinguished legacy, to increase FUS's human and material assets to secure its future, and to make it a more effective force for good in the world. This I have tried to do. As stewards, the organizational consultant Peter Block writes, as stewards, we serve our organizations, and we are accountable to them without taking control. We honor what has been given to us. We use power with a sense of grace. We pursue purposes that transcend our own self-interest. And that has been my intention, and I hope that it has, at least in some measure, been fulfilled. One last comment. A few days ago, Trina shared with me a recent kindness ranking of major American cities. Apparently, it appeared originally in the Reader's Digest. And several different criteria were used to create this ranking on kindness. And when all the scores were tabulated, Madison, Wisconsin led the pack. A refreshing contrast to another recent report that ranked Madison as the nation's 4th drunkest city. There may be some correlation there, I'm not sure. My own experience generally has supported the kindness findings. Someone tell Scott Walker that, okay? Madisonians are, as a rule, pretty darn considerate and helpful and fair-minded and appreciative. And perhaps it's just a reflection of our surrounding culture because I have experienced this kindness in your midst here at First Unitarian Society, and I have felt very blessed by it. Perhaps it is a reflection of the Madison culture, but I think really that there is more to it than that. That this is a very, very special community. And so I am moved to say, thank you. Thank you so much. You're going to have to do that again next week, you know. So we do gather each week as a community of memory and of hope and of friendship. And to this time and place, we bring our whole and sometimes our broken selves. And we seek here a place where these might be celebrated and shared. And so now we would pause to acknowledge Pamela Johnson, whose brother died last week, and the funeral will be held shortly in Dallas, Texas. So best wishes, Larry, to Pamela as well. And then our hearts and prayers are with Phoebe Yancey. Phoebe and her family as they await surgery for Phoebe, who's 11 years old, at Children's Hospital. She will have this surgery on Tuesday morning to remove a mass that was found in her brain. And so we send her our strength and our hopes for a successful surgery and quick healing and recovery. And Jennifer and Phoebe both have sung in our choirs for quite some time, so you may recognize them from that. And then finally, our thoughts are with Bill Wharton, longtime member of FUS, one of our most generous supporters. Bill has been struggling with congestive heart failure and pulmonary problems. He was hospitalized last week and is now receiving hospice care at the Grace Hospice Facility in Janesville. So we wish Bill our best. So in addition to those mentioned, we would acknowledge any other unexpressed joys or sorrows that remain among us, that as a community we hold with equal concern in our hearts. Let us sit silently for just a moment or two in the spirit of empathy and hope. So by virtue of our brief time together today, may our burdens be lightened and our joys expanded. I now invite you into the giving and receiving of our offering for the second week. 100% of your gifts will be shared with the Unitarian Universalist Association, its Promise and Practice campaign for the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists. You can read more about them in your program, and so please be generous.
I'm not afraid of spiders, I'm not afraid of snakes, or things that go bump in the night. I don't believe in monsters under the bed. I leave the closet open when I turn out the light. I've made my peace with darkened hallways, scary movies, men who mutter when you walk by. I never carry whistles, I never carry mace. What if it goes off in your purse? I'm learning to love all the lines in my face. I look for the better instead of the worse. I've had my share of bumps and bruises. to say my life's been good so far. Into every life some rain must fall, or so the story goes. But when it all gets washed away after the showers, I believe in flowers. And maybe tomorrow the world as I know it will crumble and fall apart. Still somehow I think I'll manage to look at the world through a rose-colored heart. And yes, I know all things must end. Still, passing time won't change my point of view. And the only thing I fear, some day, some night, some year, the only thing I fear is losing you.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you for your gifts to support a good cause, and thank also those individuals who have helped with our service today as volunteers. David Briles is working on our sound this morning. Steve Goldberg, as you know, was our lay worship associate. Lois Evanson, our lay minister. Patty Whitty and Clara Box were greeting us as you came in. And Liza Monroe, Dick Goldberg, Brian Chanis, and Dan Bradley were our ushers this morning. Bisnitschke and Sandy Plish are preparing our coffee today. There will be a tour afterwards for visitors today. If you would like to see our facilities, meet over there by the large windows. And then in terms of opportunities that are coming up, there is a party today honoring our 4 graduating teens who have served as child care providers in recent years. 3 of these teens will have their last day as a child care provider in the month of June. This party is today, begins at 12:45, ends around 2. Cake and lemonade will be served, so please come and help them celebrate if you have the time. And the individuals who will be graduating and no longer serving as child care providers are Erin Alban, Gwen McKechnie, Josephine Putnam, and Nicole Fund, and we thank them for their service these years. And then, another opportunity, unbeknownst to most folks, the FUS campus now boasts a brand new feature, a paved memorial path through the wooded area west of the Gabler living room. Plans for developing this area into a meditation and memorial garden have been ongoing for more than a decade. Progress has been slow, but finally enough memorial gifts were received to allow us to hire a paving company, and the results are really quite lovely. So take a walk through the woodland before or after the service today. Well, after, but if I'm speaking to the 11 o'clock people, if any of you are here and planning on sticking around, you can do it before the 11. But after the service today, and if you see any of the following individuals, you can thank them for pushing this project forward with an admirable assist from Facilities Manager Thomas Skelly. So Elaine Lohr, Bob Radford, Nick Schweitzer, and Bob Alt have been working diligently on this project, and we owe them our thanks. And so now I would invite you to rise as you are able, in body or in spirit, for a closing hymn, number 89. From the Tao Te Ching, timeless wisdom. When the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is a leader who is loved. Next, one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. And so the master doesn't talk, he acts. And when his work is done, the people say, "Amazing, we did it all by ourselves." Blessed be, and amen.
Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect and whistle a happy tune so no one will suspect I'm afraid. While shivering in my shoes, I strike a careless pose and whistle a happy tune so no one will suppose I'm afraid. The result of this deception is very strange to tell, for when I fool the people I fear, I fool myself as well. I whistle a happy tune, and every single time the happiness in the tune convinces me that I'm not afraid. Make believe you're brave, and the trick will take you far. You may be as brave as you make believe.